The Skyrim Civil War isn't just about politics. It's about whether you're allowed to pray to a god who might not even be real. Talos worship is illegal in Skyrim because the Thalmor decided he's just a dead emperor pretending to be divine. But his blessing is one of the most powerful mechanics in the game. Let's talk about why nobody uses it. Blessing of Talos. Most players don't even know Talos shrines exist. And honestly, that makes sense. Talos worship is banned across Skyrim due to the White Gold Concordat, a treaty the Empire signed with the Thalmor after losing a war. The Thalmor are high elves who believe Talos never ascended to godhood because mortals can't become gods. So they forced the Empire to outlaw his worship entirely. Stormcloaks rebelled specifically to restore Talos shrines. The entire Civil War questline is anchored to this theological debate. Here's the thing though, the blessing itself is absurdly powerful. Activating a Talos shrine grants 20% faster shout recovery for 8 real-time hours. That cuts cooldowns from 15 to 60 seconds down to 12 to 48 seconds. If you're spamming Unrelenting Force with its 15-second base cooldown, you drop to 12 seconds. That's 3 extra shouts per minute, which transforms crowd control from occasional to constant. With Talos Blessing, shouts go from tactical support abilities to your primary combat loop, and it stacks. Talos Blessing works multiplicatively with shout cooldown enchantments on amulets and gear. If you stack multiple enchanted pieces with the Blessing active, you can push certain shouts into near-permanent uptime. Unrelenting Force becomes spammable crowd control. Slow Time lets you bullet dodge through entire dungeons. Fire Breath turns into a flamethrower with minimal downtime between bursts. But many players never find these shrines because they're either hidden or openly illegal. Some are tucked into remote wilderness locations. Others sit in plain sight in cities like Whiterun. But the suppression narrative makes players assume they're all destroyed or forbidden to access. Speedrunners know exactly where they are. Casual players walk right past them or assume they're unusable because of the Civil War questline. Now here's where it gets theologically weird. Talos is historically Tiber Septim, the Cyrodiilic emperor who conquered most of Tamriel and allegedly ascended to godhood after death. Lore says he has 3 mythic aspects: Tiber the emperor, Shor the Nordic death god, and Lorkhan the Aldmeri creator-destroyer. The Thalmor argue he's just a powerful mortal who apotheosized through collective belief rather than genuine divinity. The Nords argue he earned godhood through deeds and sacrifice. Neither side can prove it definitively. So when you activate a Talos shrine and receive his blessing, you're either channeling the power of a legitimate god or benefiting from a 200-year-old propaganda campaign that convinced enough people to manifest magical effects through shared mythology. The game never clarifies which interpretation is correct. You get the mechanical benefit either way. The strangest part is how few players engage with this. Talos Blessing is one of the strongest buffs in Skyrim, but it requires finding shrines scattered across cities and wilderness, and only lasts 8 hours before you need to reactivate it. Most players finish the game without ever using it once. Shout-focused builds that would benefit most never realize it exists. But if you think forbidden worship of a maybe god with reality-warping shout spam is controversial, wait until you see what happens when you activate the shrine dedicated to the literal god of time. Blessing of Akatosh. Akatosh is either the most important god in Skyrim or the most underwhelming divine blessing in the game, and I can prove it. Before you roll your eyes, hear me out. This isn't another Magicka regeneration doesn't matter take. Akatosh's blessing literally transforms how spellcasting works at a fundamental level. The official story, Akatosh grants 10% faster Magicka regeneration. You find it at the Temple of the Divines in Solitude and scattered shrines across the province. It's a utility buff for mages. Cool, but that's not what makes it interesting. Here's where it gets weird. That 10% regeneration stacks multiplicatively with gear enchantments, the restoration perk tree, and racial abilities. So a high elf mage wearing Magicka Regan robes with Akatosh's blessing becomes a spell spamming machine. Not just efficient, unstoppable. The math compounds in ways most players never calculate. Base Regan times 1.1 times enchantment percentages times perks means you're regenerating Magicka fast enough to maintain sustained combat casting indefinitely. And this is the part nobody talks about. Akatosh's blessing enables pure destruction mage builds that would normally run dry mid-fight. Destruction has 0 Magicka cost reduction perks in its tree, making it the most resource-intensive magic school in the game. But with compounded regeneration, you don't need cost reduction anymore. You just spam fireballs, let your Magicka refill between casts, and overwhelm enemies with raw elemental damage. The blessing turns the fragile resource-starved mage archetype into sustained artillery. The lore gets even better. Akatosh is the primordial deity of time and draconic essence. He's directly responsible for dragons existing in the first place. Your dragonborn blood? That's Akatosh's doing. His blessing isn't just Magicka regeneration. It's literally channeling the power that created dragons. you're temporarily becoming dragon adjacent through divine magic. And dragons never run out of shouts because their essence is infinite. Akatosh is the only purely utility divine blessing in the game. Other blessings give you defense, or offense. Arcade grants 25 extra health, Stendar makes you block 10% more damage. This one just makes your magic resource pool recover faster, and that fits perfectly with Akatosh's role as the deity existing outside time. He doesn't need to grant you killing power or protection because he's eternal. He just makes sure you never run dry. But here's where the community splits. Some theory crafters argue Akatosh's blessing is completely redundant once you hit the magicka regeneration cap through gear alone. Why waste a blessing slot on 10% when enchanted robes already stack to absurd levels? Others point to the Atronax stone, which grants 50% spell absorption, absorbing incoming spells as magicka rather than just regenerating it passively. That's objectively better for mages who need magicka sustain in combat. So the real question isn't whether Akatosh's blessing is good, it's whether it's better than the alternatives. And for pure destruction mages who want to spam incinerate without waiting, Akatosh helps. For battle mages prioritizing survivability, literally any other blessing wins. But if you think channeling the power of the dragon god of time is niche, wait until you hear about the goddess who literally makes you unkillable through infinite healing. Blessing of Mara. Mara is either the healer's best friend or the most boring blessing in Skyrim, depending on who you ask, and I can prove it. Before you dismiss this as just another healing buff, hear me out. The Blessing of Mara makes all healing spells restore 10% more health for 8 hours. You find it at the Temple of Mara in Riften, accessible from level 1. Sounds basic, right? Cool, but here's where it gets interesting. That 10% bonus applies to every single healing spell you cast. Fast healing, close wounds, grand healing. Everything gets boosted. Stack it with the Restoration Skill Tree's regeneration perk, which increases healing spell effectiveness by 50%, and you're suddenly restoring 60% more health per cast than baseline. Add in Necromage if you're a vampire, and the numbers climb even higher. You're not just healing, you're overhealing to the point where health management stops being a concern. We're talking grand healing restoring 300 health instead of 200. That's an entire health bar for most builds, erased in one dual cast. And that's not the kicker. Combine Mara's blessing with dual cast restoration spells and the recovery perk that speeds up magicka regeneration by 50%, and you've created a self-sustaining healing loop. Cast close wounds, restore half your health bar, wait 3 seconds for magicka to refill, repeat. At that point, you're functionally unkillable, as long as you have time to cast. The numbers don't lie. Mara plus regeneration perk plus dual casting equals a tank that refuses to die. Throw in enchanted gear that boosts restoration cost reduction by 100%, and you're casting healing spells for 0 magicka. Literally, free immortality. But here's where the community splits. Roleplayers use Mara as the centerpiece for cleric and paladin builds. It's thematically perfect. Motherly nurturing, life-giving magic. Compassion as a combat mechanic. You're the healer, the protector, the one who refuses to let anyone fall. And narratively, that's powerful. You walk into a bandit camp, take arrows to the chest, heal through it all while smiting enemies with turn undead or a mace. It's the fantasy of the warrior priest, and Mara enables that perfectly. Min-maxers, though? They argue Mara is overshadowed by just chugging health potions. Potions are instant. Healing spells require casting time, and in legendary difficulty, that window gets you killed. Active potion spam gives you control. Spell-based healing is slower, and demands magicka management. The debate is genuine. Do you want to feel like a dedicated healer who earns their survival, or do you want instant safety at the cost of inventory weight? One approach is immersive. The other is efficient. Neither is wrong. Here's the thing. Mara creates builds that trivialize difficulty through spell sustain. You're not dodging, you're not timing perfectly, you're just casting and refusing to die. Some players love that fantasy of being the unkillable priest. Others find it turns combat into a tedious cycle where you're spending more time healing than fighting. When a dragon breathes fire and your response is to stand there healing through the damage instead of moving, the encounter loses tension. It becomes math, not combat. The blessing is thematically aligned with Mara's domain: love, compassion, fertility. She's the goddess of nurturing, and her blessing nurtures you back to full health through enhanced magic. It's clean design. The question is whether healing should belong to Mara or to Akatosh, the dragon god of time and divine restoration. Lore purists argue both ways, but mechanically, Mara owns the healing niche. She's the patron of restoration magic, and the game reflects that. So yeah, Mara makes you unkillable when you build around healing spells. Whether that's exciting or boring depends entirely on what you want out of Skyrim. At least you'll never run out of health mid-dungeon, unlike the blessing we're covering next. Agent of Nocturnal. Agent of Nocturnal is either the most balanced stealth tool in Skyrim, or proof that the developers wanted every single player to become an assassin. And I can prove it. You get this power from a statue of Nocturnal hidden inside the Twilight Sepulchre, the final location of the Thieves Guild questline. The catch? You have to finish the entire entire Thieves Guild questline to access it. We're talking 10+ hours of gameplay, countless fetch quests, and making Brynjolf trust you enough to let you into the inner sanctum. But here's what you get. Invisibility for 120 seconds with a 60-second cooldown, repeatable, forever. The invisibility breaks the moment you attack or cast a spell, identical to the base invisibility spell. But the cooldown is the kicker. You can go invisible, wait 60 seconds, and do it again. No magicka cost, no potions, no sneaking around praying your sneak skill is high enough. Just press the button and vanish. This is the only divine or Daedric power in the entire game that grants an active ability you trigger on demand. Talos speeds up shouts. Akatosh increases magicka regeneration. But Agent of Nocturnal? It turns you into a temporary assassin regardless of your build. Heavy Armor Nord Warrior? Invisible. Pure Destruction Mage? Invisible. The power doesn't care what your character sheet says. Nocturnal is the Daedric Prince of Darkness and Theft, ruling over a shadow plane called the Evergloam, but she's depicted as neutral rather than evil. She's not demanding blood sacrifice like Boethia or corrupting your soul like Mephala. The Thieves Guild worships her, and in return, she gives them the tools to do their jobs. You help her stay relevant in the mortal world, she makes you untouchable in the shadows. Nobody's getting sacrificed. It's just business. The stealth community has been fighting about this power since 2011. One camp argues it trivializes the stealth archer playstyle entirely. Why bother with invisibility potions when you can just activate the power mid-fight and reposition? The other camp points out the 60-second cooldown prevents endless chain invisibility. You have to think tactically. Use it to escape, reposition, set up the next shot. On legendary difficulty, that cooldown matters. Screw up your timing and you're eating a warhammer to the face. But let's talk about what this means for non-stealth builds. Drop Agent of Nocturnal on a two-handed warrior, and suddenly you've got a glass cannon with an escape button. Battle mage running out of magicka? Go invisible, let it regenerate, re-engage. The power doesn't make you better at stealth. It just makes you invisible. And invisibility is one of the most broken mechanics in the game when you're not locked into a specific playstyle to use it. This is locked behind the full Thieves Guild questline. Bethesda knew what they were giving players. They gated the most versatile utility power in the game behind 10+ hours of content to make sure you earned it. You can't just walk up to a statue at level 1 and break the game. And here's the moral wrinkle. You're worshipping a Daedric prince. In Skyrim's theology, that's supposed to be controversial, but Nocturnal doesn't ask you to murder anyone. She doesn't corrupt your gear or curse your bloodline. She just watches over thieves and rewards loyalty with shadow magic. The only price is joining her guild and doing the work. Some players refuse to take Daedric powers on principle, but Nocturnal is the hardest one to argue against. She's not evil, she's just not divine. At least Nocturnal gives you something useful without demanding you stab a friend in the back, unlike Boethia, who we'll get to next. Blessing of Boethia. Boethia's blessing is either a niche one-handed buff or a complete waste of a shrine slot depending on who you ask. And I can prove it's both. Here's the thing, a flat 10% damage bonus to one-handed weapons sounds modest, and that's because it is. You activate the shrine in Raven Rock Temple on Solstheim, and you get 10% more damage with swords, axes, maces, and daggers for 8 hours. That's it. No spells, no bows, no shouts. Just one-handed melee. Cool, but that's not the whole story. The moment you stack this blessing with fortify one-handed enchantments, the math changes. Because Boethia's 10% applies multiplicatively, not additively, which means if you're running enchanted gear that already doubles your sword damage, Boethia's blessing doesn't add 10% to your base weapon. It adds 10% to your doubled damage. Then your perks multiply that, then your poisons multiply that. By level 50, a dedicated one-handed build with Boethia's blessing is dealing noticeably more damage per swing because every damage source stacks on top of the previous multiplier. The problem is most players never notice because 10% on top of everything else is marginal compared to just wearing better gear or using stronger poisons. And here's where it gets weird. Boethia's blessing is locked behind the Dragonborn DLC and requires traveling all the way to Solstheim just to activate a shrine that only buffs one specific weapon type. Every other blessing you can find on the mainland offers broader utility or stronger effects. Boethia's shrine sits in Raven Rock Temple, a location most players visit once for the main questline and never return to. You walk up, you activate it, you leave. There's no trial, no combat, no challenge. It's the most forgettable blessing in the entire DLC, which is philosophically fascinating for a Daedric prince whose whole domain is betrayal and conspiracy. Boethia rules Attribution's Share, an infinite arena plane where champions battle forever. The combat theme makes sense if you view her as rewarding strength through victory, but the blessing itself has nothing to do with that. No fight, no test, no proving yourself worthy. You just click a shrine and get a minor one-handed buff. The philosophical contradiction is just sitting there. Now let's talk build synergies, because this is where Boethia becomes genuinely limited. Dual wielding builds benefit twice since you're swinging two one-handed weapons. Sword and board warriors get the damage boost on their primary weapon, but two-handed builds, archers, mages, and anyone not using one-handed weapons, they get absolutely nothing. The blessing doesn't discriminate based on combat style. It just ignores everyone who isn't swinging a one-handed weapon. The only builds that genuinely benefit are pure one-handed specialists who have already maxed their perks, enchantments, and gear, because that's when the multiplicative 10% actually adds up to something noticeable. But if you're running a hybrid build or anything that splits damage between weapon types, Boethia is mathematically inferior to nearly every other blessing in the game. Community opinion on this one is pretty unified. It's underwhelming. Most players forget Boethia even has a shrine on Solstheim because it's tucked inside Ravenrock Temple with no unique visual indicator and no reason to return after your first visit. Build theorists occasionally mention it in one-handed optimization guides, but even then it's usually listed as nice to have if you're already in Ravenrock rather than something worth planning around. Bethesda clearly didn't prioritize this blessing when balancing the Dragonborn DLC's shrine system, but if you think a forgettable 10% one-handed buff is disappointing, wait until you hear about the blessing that requires moral corruption to unlock its full potential. Blessing of Azura. Azura is either the most philosophically complex Daedric prince in the entire Elder Scrolls pantheon, or just really good at PR. And honestly, both things can be true. Before you write her off as another Chaos Demon, hear me out. Azura is the Daedric prince of Dusk and Dawn, ruling over a twilight plane called Moonshadow that exists somewhere between Oblivion and the mortal world. She's fundamentally different from the other princes. While Molag Bal tortures souls and Mehrunes Dagon burns cities for fun, Azura represents ambition and prophecy. She doesn't destroy. She manipulates fate itself, which is either better or way worse depending on your perspective. Her blessing reflects that complexity. Restores 50 magicka every 2 seconds for 8 hours. That's 25 magicka per second, which doesn't sound insane until you realize it outpaces every single magicka draining spell in the game. Mayhem, Fury, Conjuration Chains, all of them cost less per second than Azura's blessing restores. You've created an infinite spell loop. Stand still for the full 8 hours, and you'll regenerate 14,400 magicka total, which is completely meaningless, because nobody does that, but the point is the rate. You can spam Mayhem indefinitely. You can summon armies without pause. You can chain Ice Storm spam across entire dungeons without stopping. Combine this with regenerate magicka perks from the skill tree, and you hit true zero-cost casting. The game stops being about resource management and becomes about how creatively you can abuse infinite spell spam. Destruction mages go from glass cannons to unstoppable elemental artillery. Illusion builds transform into crowd control gods who never run dry. But here's where it gets weird. Azura's blessing is accessed through her quest line, which offers you a genuine moral choice. You can complete Azura's star and receive her artifact, a reusable soul gem that captures white souls indefinitely. Or you can betray her for Nelakar's corrupted version called the Black Star, which captures black souls instead. The game frames this as good versus evil. Azura's path is righteous. Nelakar's path is treachery, except the evil choice is objectively better. The Black Star captures human souls, which are grand level and far more valuable for enchanting. Azura's star only captures creature souls, which cap it grand for mammoth souls but are otherwise weaker. Mechanically, morally, strategically, the wrong choice is superior in every measurable way. And that's not an accident. This isn't a developer oversight or balance mistake. It's Azura's entire philosophy distilled into game mechanics. She doesn't care about good or evil. She cares about ambition, about whether you're willing to seize power when it's offered, even if it costs you divine favor. The questline is testing you, and if you choose optimization over ethics, you've proven you understand her domain perfectly. You've embraced the twilight, the space between light and dark where ambition lives. The shrine itself is hidden on a mountain south of Winterhold, isolated and desolate, matching Azura's aesthetic of twilight solitude. Most players miss it entirely without a guide. The location is deliberate. Azura doesn't advertise. You find her when you're ready, or you don't find her at all. The statue towers over the landscape when you do find it, a massive monument visible for miles once you know where to look, but invisible to those who aren't seeking it. The deeper question is whether this moral inversion was intentional game design or just Bethesda not thinking through the implications of making the evil artifact mechanically superior. And honestly, given how much care went into Azura's lore, the Twilight imagery, the philosophical themes, the fact that she's one of the few neutral-leaning Daedric princes, I'm leaning toward intentional. They wanted you to feel the tension between doing the right thing and doing the smart thing. They wanted the choice to hurt. But if you think a Daedric prince testing your ethics through artifact choices is morally complex, wait until you meet the literal God of Dawn who grants blessings locked behind 10 hours of DLC content and vampire genocide. Blessing of Ariel. Here's the thing about Oriel. This blessing is almost nobody's first choice, because most players will never even see it. It's locked behind the Dawnguard DLC, which means you need to own paid content, complete a 10+ hour questline involving vampire hunters and ancient prophecies, and reach the Wayshrine of Radiance before this blessing even exists for you. But if you can access it, Oriel is arguably one of the most specialized blessings in the entire game. The mechanics are straightforward. Oriel grants 10% increased bow damage for 8 hours. That's it. No health regeneration, no magical effects, just pure archery optimization. And before you dismiss this as niche, understand what this does for archer builds. A 10% damage increase applies to every single arrow you fire, stacking multiplicatively with archery skill bonuses, equipment enchantments, and perks like Overdraw. A maxed Overdraw perk gives you 100% more bow damage baseline. Add Oriel's 10% on top of that, and you're functionally turning every bow in the game into a significantly stronger version of itself. That's the difference between two-shotting a Draugr Deathlord and one-shotting it. Unlike Mara's 10% boost to healing spell effectiveness, or the broader combat blessings, Oriel does one thing exceptionally well. It's not trying to be versatile, it's trying to make archers unstoppable, and it succeeds. Stealth archers, the most popular build in Skyrim, get maximum value here, because bow damage is literally their entire offensive strategy. You're already investing in archery perks, already enchanting for bow damage, already using the best arrows you can craft. Oriel's blessing takes that optimization and pushes it 10% further without requiring any additional investment. Now, the lore. Oriel is the Aedric god of dawn and mercy, the chief divine opponent to Daedric forces in Elder Scrolls theology. He represents ascension, divine warrior protector archetypes, the idea that holiness and combat prowess aren't contradictory. The Dawnguard questline itself is positioned as a spiritual crusade against vampires, and Oriel's bow, the artifact you recover during the questline, is one of the most powerful weapons in the game, dealing bonus damage to undead and capable of blocking out the sun itself. But there's a theological debate baked into this. Some lore theorists argue Oriel and Akatosh are the same deity, just worshipped under different names by different cultures. Oriel is the Aldmeri interpretation. Akatosh is the Imperial version. If that's true, then the blessing mechanics create a weird split. Akatosh grants magic resistance, Oriel grants bow damage. They don't overlap at all, despite supposedly being the same god. Others argue they're distinct entities with separate divine portfolios, which explains the mechanical differences but complicates the pantheon's structure. The game never clarifies this. Here's the problem: accessibility. Base game players don't get Oriel, period. The blessing is DLC exclusive, meaning a genuinely powerful archery buff is paywalled behind $20 of additional content and a questline that takes most players 10 to 15 hours to complete. This fragments game balance in a way no other blessing does. Talos is hidden, but discoverable. Mara is accessible from level 1. Oriel requires purchasing Dawnguard, installing it, progressing through vampire politics, and reaching the correct Wayshrine before the blessing even appears as an option, and the community is split on whether that's acceptable. DLC supporters argue Oriel's power justifies the paywall. You're getting a specialized blessing because you invested in specialized content. Base game purists argue powerful build options shouldn't be locked behind mandatory paid DLC, especially when archery is already the most popular playstyle in the game. Balance theorists point out that Oriel's focused functionality makes it objectively stronger for archer builds than any base game alternative, creating a scenario where paying players have access to mechanically superior tools that free players can't replicate through skill or strategy. But if you think one paywalled divine blessing is controversial, wait until you meet the Daedric prince who literally rewards you for murdering people in their sleep. Blessing of Mephala. The single most disturbing blessing in Skyrim is Mephala's, and I can prove it. While every other Daedric Shrine blessing grants simple passive benefits, Mephala's blessing fundamentally operates through psychological horror. It improves prices by 10% when trading, but that's not the power. The power is what you had to do to access it, because the only way to receive Mephala's blessing is through the Whispering Door questline in Dragon's Reach, where you're manipulated into murdering innocent NPCs to empower the Ebony Blade. The blessing itself is mechanically worthless. 10% price improvement, that's it. But here's where it gets dark. The blessing is a trophy marking you as someone who completed Mephala's corruption arc. It's not about the mechanical benefit. It's about the permanent record that you murdered your friends for a Daedric prince's approval. The game remembers. Your character remembers. And that 10% price buff is a constant reminder of what you did to earn it. Mephala is the Daedric prince of murder and conspiracy, ruling the Spiral Skyne realm where schemes unfold across infinite dimensions. Her artifact, the Ebony Blade, scales damage through NPC murders, representing moral corruption as quantifiable power increase. The more innocent people you betray and kill, the stronger the blade becomes. The questline involves psychological manipulation via the Whispering Door possession, where Mephala literally whispers instructions to murder your allies. You realize halfway through that you're being used, but the game forces you to continue if you want the artifact. The Ebony Blade itself is mechanically insane for assassins. Two-handed weapon that absorbs health with every hit, and damage scales based on friendly NPC kills. Kill 10 friends, the blade reaches maximum power, but warriors dismiss it as requiring tedious murder grinding, arguing the scaling system incentivizes save scumming to reload murdered NPCs. The balanced debate centers on whether betrayal kills should be permanent or renewable, because permanent kills mean you run out of friends to murder before maxing the blade. The community splits hard on this one. Min-maxers elevate the Ebony Blade to S tier, calling it the ultimate vampire weapon because health absorption synergizes with lifesteal builds. But ethical roleplayers refuse the blessing entirely, treating the Whispering Door questline as a trap testing player morality. Some players deliberately fail the quest to avoid complicity in Mephala's manipulation, sacrificing mechanical power for roleplay integrity. Here's the real weight of Mephala's blessing. It represents power through corruption. Divine blessings like Talos or Akatosh offer passive protection, asking nothing in return. Daedric blessings demand moral compromise. Mephala's specifically requires murdering people you've befriended, transforming you into the monster she wants you to be. The Ebony Blade's damage scaling is a progress bar measuring your descent into evil. Every kill makes you stronger and more corrupted simultaneously. The betrayal kill mechanic creates genuine controversy. Is it meaningful moral choice or tedious murder checklist? Speedrunners exploit friendly NPCs as disposable upgrade fuel. Challenge runners ban the Ebony Blade in house rules for trivializing legendary difficulty through lifesteal spam. Casual players don't even realize the blade scales because betrayal kills aren't explained in-game, requiring wiki research to understand the upgrade system. Matter of fact, that's the philosophical question Mephala's blessing forces. When power requires evil, does accepting it make you complicit? The game doesn't judge you for taking the blessing, but the questline structure ensures you feel the weight of every murder. NPCs you've helped suddenly become targets. Friends become fuel for your blade's hunger. Mephala doesn't force you to kill them. She just whispers suggestions and waits for you to choose corruption. That's what separates Daedric blessings from divine ones. The divines protect you passively. The Daedra empower you actively, but the price is always your soul. Mephala's blessing is the clearest example. Yes, you get a 10% price improvement that means absolutely nothing mechanically, but you earned it by becoming a patient killer deity's puppet, murdering innocents to prove you're worthy of her dark gift. The power is irrelevant. The corruption is permanent, and the game remembers every choice you made to get there. If you enjoyed this video and want to see every questline in Skyrim explained, click the video on the screen now.